Welcome back. It's hot here in Michigan, and that means it's August, and it's time for another edition of our monthly podcast, 20 Before 20, our podcast where simply we spend 20 minutes getting to know an artist before they come to downtown Lake Orion to play at 20 Front Street. My name is Kevin Bessert. I'm part of the team here at 20, and I'm really excited for this month's conversation with the artist Tray Wellington. Tray, thanks for taking the time out of your schedule and joining us today.
Man, thank you so much for having me, Kevin. I'm really excited for our show there this week.
Yep, so let's just right off the top, let's mention that Tray will be in Lake Orion playing at 20 Front Street this Saturday, August 16th. Limited tickets are still available on our website at 20frontstreet.com, so please hurry and grab those tickets before they're gone. So Tray, I want to jump right in, and I thought a good starting point here would be I want to read just a little bio or little brag sheet here that I found online, and there's some things in here I want to touch on. So I think this will give our audience just a little bit glimpse into exactly who you are and what you do. So it says the Tray Wellington Band is a high-energy acoustic newgrass group led by banjo virtuoso and multi-time IBMA award winner and 2019 Momentum Instrumentalist of the Year, Tray Wellington. Said this group pushes the bounds of bluegrass music, incorporating bossa nova, jazz, and blues elements to their originals to create a unique, new, exciting sound, as well as pay tribute to their bluegrass heroes before them. So the one part I want to touch in there that jumped out to me is the term newgrass. I like that term.
Yeah.
I like that term. I think it's cool. Explain a little bit about what that means as it pertains to you in your music.
Yeah, so I think the term newgrass, or as like more and more recently, I've been using the term progressive bluegrass.
Cool.
Because it's like, I think a better description. But yeah, the whole like idea is just like basically taking, like no matter what musical direction I ever go in life, bluegrass is going to be my home base because it's where I started. It's the one I'm familiar with, and so naturally that's like home for me in a lot of ways, and so. The thing is, like, with my music, I explore a lot. I try a lot of new things. Me and my band, we try a lot of different, musical styles. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But, the idea of it is basically taking these elements and you're adding to something that's already, a lot of the time the metaphor is home as a foundation of like, and, you're basically building on that foundation with these other little layers to your, like, overall musical sound.
Yeah, and that's something else to kind of evolve on that. One of the other things I read here, it said, you have numerous qualities here invoking, 5-string banjo legends, but there's also so many that are brand new, and it says, referencing jazz, swing, bebop, hip hop, rock and roll. And as I read that, all those different genres, I mean, did you have influences growing up in all those different genres to kind of bring that all together?
Yeah, so like when I first growing up, like one of my biggest things is I was like always like listening to a bunch of music growing up, and this is before I even started playing music. And one of my things is I was always super into a lot of different kinds of music. Whether it be like growing up around my grandpa, my main thing for a long time was like classic country and like some like early rock stuff, and I was like super into that. But as I started, my mom, it was like and then my mom was the exact opposite. Like my mom was like a Snoop Dogg, Tupac, people like that.
Yeah.
And so like I was always hearing like all these different things, and so I think naturally it's like I hear things in all these musics that I want to incorporate. And there's things like I'm like, okay, this doesn't work, but this part of this can actually work and can help. Like if it's like we're doing a more groovy thing, like a groovier song, maybe taking some elements of like, oh, how does hip hop approach this rhythm is like a really smart way to like kind of approach that because it's such a groovy music naturally, and then you can put that into your acoustic kind of realm.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's cool. And I figured that was the case. There must have been multiple musical influences growing up to kind of bring that all together. So you mentioned your childhood. Correct me if I'm wrong. You grew up in Western North Carolina area. Go ahead.
Yeah, I grew up in a town called Ashe County, North Carolina.
Okay.
Specifically, like within that, there's like Jefferson, North Carolina, which is one of the like little like towns within the county. And I grew up there. It's like really close to Boone, North Carolina. If any of the listeners know where that is, like 30 minutes from there.
Very, very cool. And so at what point, you said, you had these influences, your grandpa, your mom, all these different musical influences, but at what point did you kind of take it to the next level and say, I want to start playing an instrument, or I want to start, going down that path, or I want to be a performer?
Yeah, it was about the time I was in, when I was in early high school, late middle school, early high school, I would say. I was playing trombone in the middle school band, funny enough, and
Okay.
then but around that time, like I also started playing electric guitar because some friends of mine were playing it, and I got super into that. And then, one day I was listening to my grandpa's CD collection. I found a CD of Doc Watson,
Okay.
and I just like fell in love with that CD. I was like, oh man, this is so cool. It's like such a cool sound. And it was like the flat picking style of Doc Watson. So originally I like joined this club and I was like wanting to learn flat picking guitar. And then in that club I heard banjo for the first time
Oh wow.
and kind of got hooked. And then as I was learning and as I was like kind of like, you know, really getting into it, I eventually, when I was probably like 17, 18, wanted to realize like, oh, I want to take this a little bit more seriously.
And so taking it a little bit more seriously, once you kind of honed in on the banjo, what did taking it a little more seriously look like as far as just kind of, learning it and just kind of, becoming more advanced on it?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, early on it was like learning and sitting down and learning like a lot of like how do you play this instrument? What are the things that make banjo the banjo? And I think like after a while, I kind of like, I learned like a lot of the bluegrass stuff. Like I was super into Earl Scruggs, J.D. Crowe, Ralph Stanley, people like that, who are a lot of the trad bluegrass guys. And then as I started developing more as an artist, and like when I was in college, I realized like, oh, this isn't such a restrictive instrument. Like I don't have to just play bluegrass on this thing. It's like I can do different genres, and then from there, kind of slowly start getting into some other genres, like later in college, and studied a fair bit of jazz and some other things.
And you talk about being able to touch, on some of those different genres, another thing I read says, when you step on stage, it says the audience sees a bluegrass band, but by the time you guys leave the stage, they see something completely different. And I know you guys sometimes incorporate some kind of cool covers into that. So, you talked
Yeah,
about being able to understand the banjo opened it up to you didn't have to just do a certain thing.
yeah.
Talk a little bit about what your shows look like and even what people can expect on Saturday at 20 Front Street in that regard.
Yeah, yeah, so like a lot of the time it's like my main goal of a show, and main goal of any show I think a lot of times is like you leave and the audience leaves with something.
Yeah.
And for me it's like that is I want people to walk away first of all having a good time. Like everybody's had a good time at the show, which is always really important for me. And the second is making sure that people walk away with like a new idea of like the especially acoustic music. Like I want them to know like, oh, this is another way to do acoustic music that's really fun. You know what I mean? Because I think so often acoustic music kind of gets roped into these different things, and
Sure.
I think for me it's like not about that. It's about just like I want to have a good time with the audience. I want like you know any show. You should have like different. You should have like songs that make you feel something. You should have songs that make you like sit on the edge of your seat. And that's what I always try to invoke with every show.
Very, very cool. Um, so another thing, and you did touch a little bit on this as well, but um, as you've kind of grown up, and started to kind of understand the industry and specifically, the role that that style of music with the banjo bluegrass plays, it
Mm-hmm.
says that you knew how you were perceived in the roots music spaces, and you learned how to kind of use that to your advantage. Um, can you explain that a little bit, or just kind of how, as you've grown up in that space, how you've learned to kind of use that as that perception to your advantage?
Yeah, like for me, I think it's given me a lot of freedom to like people. It's like I think like where I'm at with music is like so many people have like seen me enough that they know what they're getting.
Yeah,
And so now there's not as much of a pressure to be trying to do a certain thing, because people, at this point, I think it's like I'm perceived in a certain type of way, and I'm bringing a certain thing to like either a festival or a venue, and I think people are starting to kind of like pick up on those little like what I kind of bring to that, and I think for me that really helps just in the way of like then there's not like this expectation of trying like I don't have to like be like oh I'm gonna do this completely different thing for this festival or do this completely thing as well, but like I also do try to like I try to also like do a mix of things a lot of the time just to like depending on where I'm at because I also like Yeah, I do want people to know, it's like I'm rooted in this thing, even though like I'm trying a lot of different things. And sometimes I find you just need to like show that you're like rooted in something, and people are like way more receptive to what you're doing as a whole.
Yeah, and do you still feel like that reception is kind of? I know some you've had some firsts this year. Looks like you did the Telluride Bluegrass Festival for the first time you were out there. So I mean, you're still
Yeah.
getting on some new stages, some new spaces, but you still feel like that's the perception, or that's the kind of reception you're getting from people, even if they are maybe seeing you for the first time.
Yeah, and like a lot of the time, it's like just you're reading out a room, so it's like you can kind of tell by walking. Like one thing I like to do at either a venue or a town or like a festival, is I like to see like, when the doors open, I like to look and I'm like, oh, who's coming to the show?
Yeah, that's good.
And what are they expecting? Like,
Yeah.
where do they know me from? Because then it's like, okay, now I know. Okay, these people are coming from here, here, and here. It's like, it's like okay, well, maybe like they'd like to hear something, that we've done before, but then maybe they'd also like to hear something new that I haven't done before. So let me not like, accidentally play the exact same set, or anything like that.
Oh no, for sure, for sure. So switching gears a little bit here, I am excited. Looks like your show at 20 Front Street kind of lines up. You just released a new EP,
Mm-hmm.
Spatial Awareness. So
Yeah.
you have some new music out, which I'm sure we'll hear a little bit of on Saturday at 20 Front Street.
Mm-hmm.
But tell us a little bit about the new EP and kind of what the new music does for you. And we've been kind of talking about how you're kind of gradually advancing some of your music. What can we expect with the new EP?
Yeah, so with the new EP, it just came out on Friday, August 8th, and look, just a couple days ago. And, it's just a collection of songs, and I'm almost looking at it as an extension of my 2024 album, Detour of the Moon, that came out. And it's basically just, kind of wrapping up a lot of those ideas for that stage of like where I'm at in my music, and just because that project was like just a very specific thing sonically. And, kind of like this idea of using space as a metaphor for growth as a musician. Because I find like with music, you're always like you're trying to every album you want to be a little bit better than the last album. You
Of
want people
course,
to like
yeah.
you never want somebody to like be like, oh, this album was not as good as this album.
Yeah.
That's like what you don't want. And so and in this case, like being somebody who thinks like, the idea of space and the metaphor of space is really, really cool. I think, using these things um, as like a kind of like, just like I said, a metaphor, it's just such I think spatial awareness is just kind of like building on and showing that I've expanded since Detour of the Moon with some of these things, but also trying to like continually, gradually keep going with it and keep like exploring new ways to arrange, new ways to write tunes, new ways to write songs that are meaningful to me.
Well, that's great. Yeah, and look forward to hearing some of those on Saturday at 20
Thank
Front
you.
Street. Some of the new music. One thing I wanted to touch on, and it was something I think it was one of the first times maybe you came across my radar screen was, and we mentioned at the top some of the accolades you've accomplished, but one was when you won the 2024 Steve Martin Banjo Prize, and I want to ask a little
Yeah.
bit about that, just because Steve Martin obviously a big name. So what did it mean to receive that award, and kind of talk a little bit about what has Steve Martin meant to you're such the banjo in general, just because he has such a
Hmm.
large platform and stage, and obviously loves the instrument in the same way you do.
Yeah, I think when it comes to Steve or anybody of that caliber who's like well known even outside the world of banjo specifically.
Yep.
He's a well known actor, obviously. And, you have people like Ed Helms as well, who's a well known actor. And I think anybody like that, I think it's just a really cool thing because they're using their platform. Like thing I love one of the things I love about Steve Martin is he'll just come to a bluegrass festival and like play a bluegrass festival, and I just love because he doesn't have to do that.
No, no.
He could just stay in home, like have like but he chooses to go out, be part of the community, interact with musicians in the community, and I think anybody who does something like that and kind of brings a light to an instrument that is often misunderstood and can show it in a way that has this grace to it that often because banjo's been such an instrument that's been stigmatized as like a joke instrument, things
For
like
sure.
that. And So I think like having somebody who's like, oh no, this is like a serious thing. Like I'm a serious, like, he's like a comedian obviously, but he's like, he's also like a serious, like, actor, and
Yeah.
like has done like different kinds of roles, and just like having somebody like him advocate for it is just like really really cool. And having him do something like Steve Martin Banjo Prize, helping out like artists like me, and so many other amazing musicians that otherwise might not, like it gives like a big step forward, with like, there's a prize with it that really
Sure.
helps out. And I think it's just such an amazing thing because it's something he doesn't have to do, that he's choosing to do because he loves it, and I think that's really cool.
That is cool, and I'm glad I asked that because yeah, that's great information on him and what he does. I knew he was well respected in that arena, but it sounds like he's really helping on just showing up at bluegrass festivals is super cool.
Yeah, I just think it's cool.
Yeah, and along those same lines, I read you've been an assistant teacher at Bella Flex Blue Ridge Banjo Camp. So, and along those same lines of giving back, is teaching something as you move forward in your career? Is that something that you want to do more of, and you see, down the line, kind of giving back and doing more teaching on the instrument?
Yeah, I love teaching. It's kind of like it's an ebb and flow thing with me as far as timing goes, because a lot of the time I'm just not, I don't have a lot of time
Sure.
to do it anymore. But I try to stay pretty busy a lot, even whether with touring or recording or otherwise. And so teaching is one of those things that I love doing it when I have the time, and it's like something I'm really passionate about because and I think I'm like, I like, not to toot my own. I think I'm pretty good. Like I've learned to be kind of good at it, and so it's something like that I'm trying to always keep part of like what I do in some regard, because I think it, like, even if it's like a something where I'm talking about a subject, like more of like a um, kind of like a, I forget what the word is, like a seminar or something.
Sure,
It's
sure.
yeah, like I still love doing that kind of stuff too.
Well, that's great. And yeah, I'm sure on such a specific instrument like the banjo that the ability to learn from someone such as yourself is just amazing for those students. Um, as we kind of head towards wrapping up, and these 20 minutes always fly by, and it seems like the
Yeah, it's
time is always.
quick.
But a couple of other things I want to ask you about. We talked a little bit about the new EP, but what does the rest of 2025 and even into 2026 have in store? Obviously, it seems like there's a lot of first. I mentioned the Telluride. It seems like things are really starting to take off for you. What's the rest of this year and even kind of into next year have in store for the Tray Wellington band?
Yeah, like I'm definitely going to, keep on, trying to increase my touring, increase what I do, meet, reach more people, that's always really important to me. And I'm working on a new album right now that I'm really,
Great.
really, really excited for. It has a lot of great, like kind of my first album in a long time that, or ever really, that's had like a ton of guests on it.
Okay.
And
Cool.
so, yeah, I've just been working on that since April, with John Mylander producing, who's an amazing fiddle player. He has a group called The Forecast. And yeah, I'm just really, really excited for people to hear this album. It's like probably my proudest work I've ever, like, by far ever done. And so I'm just like, yeah, really, really excited for people to hear it.
And along those lines of first and kind of getting out there a little bit more, I think if I'm not mistaken, this is going to be your first trip to Michigan this weekend for a couple of shows in Michigan, right? First plays in
Yeah,
Michigan.
I've never played in Michigan. No, surprisingly,
What
like
took
I've
you
like
so long?
I don't know. It's kind of weird. Yeah, it's like I was thinking about it today, like, or the other day. I was like looking, and I was like, I don't think I've ever actually played. I've been to Michigan, and I taught a camp in Michigan one time,
Okay.
but yeah, I realized like, oh, I've never like came up to play Michigan, which is really odd. I've been all around it except Michigan.
Very, very cool. We're excited to have you. So I always end the podcast with the same question I ask every artist to kind of end things, but I'm super excited to ask you this question because of what we talked about at the beginning with your wide range of musical influences. But my question is just simply, what are you listening to right now, or what is something maybe someone you've seen live recently, or just something that's getting heavy rotation in the Tray Wellington playlist right now?
Man, one thing I feel like that we've been coming back to a lot is I like this musician called Robert Glasper,
Okay.
who's like an R&B jazz musician, And we've been listening to that a lot in the car. I feel like you know, no matter like we kind of go on a lot of different like we do the Spotify jams and we
Yeah.
go like on a lot of different things because everybody has a little bit of different taste. But you know, one thing I think across the line that a lot of us have been doing has been Robert Glasper. It seems like so I've been listening to a lot of that.
Cool. Well,
Yeah,
I always tell my guests that question is pretty selfish because I'm just looking for like what am I missing or what new music. So
yeah,
so
no.
I'm definitely gonna have to check out Robert Glasper now. So I'm excited now that you've given me that little tip. So
Yeah.
well, Trey, thanks so much for doing this. We really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. As I said, we're super excited to welcome you to Michigan, welcome you to 20 Front Street. And just
Thank
another
you.
reminder that he will be at 20 Front Street this Saturday, August 16th. The show starts at 8 o'clock. Tickets are still available on our website at 20frontstreet.com. So please grab those before you're gone.
Don't miss out, folks.
And Trey, safe travels, and we will see you
Thank
on
you.
Saturday.
Awesome. We'll see you then.
All
Thanks so
right.
much for having me.
Thank you.